She was only 5, barefoot, and crying beside the woods. And then she whispered, "He wants to hurt Mommy." That's when everything changed. The Montana wind rolled in low and slow, brushing the tops of the pine trees like a careful hand through an old man's hair. It was the kind of late autumn afternoon that made everything look a little washed out. Grays in the sky, dust on the road, and memories heavy on the heart. Officer Jack Monroe leaned slightly forward in the driver's seat of his patrol truck, his gloved fingers resting on the steering wheel without tension, but with readiness. His K-9 partner, Rocco, sat upright in the passenger seat, his ears twitching with every rustle of the wind. Jack had been with Birchwood County for 7 years. Before that, he'd worn another uniform in another desert. But Birchwood was different. Here he wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to serve. Most days were quiet. Speeding tickets, neighbor disputes, the occasional bar fight that smelled more of regret than danger. But something about today felt still. He adjusted the volume on the police radio. Static. Silence. No chatter. Not even the usual code reports. Just him, the woods, and the winding road through the outskirts of Birchwood. Rocco gave a low growl, sharp and sudden. Jack's eyes darted to the right. At first he saw nothing. Then he saw movement. Small. A blur of pale skin and tangled blonde hair near the edge of the tree line. He braked hard. Dust rose around the tires. Jack was already opening the door before the truck came to a full stop. Rocco followed, leaping down beside him, nose in the air. Jack's boots crunched on the gravel as he jogged toward the woods, his hand instinctively near his holster, not out of fear, but habit. And then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 5. She was barefoot, her knees scraped, her tiny hands holding something crumpled and tight against her chest. Her dress was torn near the hem, and her cheeks were streaked with dirt, and something darker. Dried blood, maybe. But what hit Jack the hardest wasn't what she wore. It was the way she looked at Rocco. Not with fear, with relief. She knelt and touched the dog's head, pressing her forehead gently to his fur. Rocco stilled, his eyes softening. Jack had never seen his partner go that still around anyone, let alone a stranger. Jack crouched down, voice calm. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Jack. This is Rocco. Can you tell me your name?" The little girl didn't answer at first. Her eyes flicked to him, cautious. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Ava." Jack nodded. "Ava. That's a beautiful name. Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Are you alone?" A pause. Then she held up the paper in her hands. It was a child's drawing, the lines shaky and pressed hard like she'd drawn it in a rush. 3 stick figures, 1 big, 1 medium, 1 small. But the largest one had its face scribbled out in violent black crayon strokes, over and over and over. The other 2 figures had hair and smiling mouths. The smallest one had a dog drawn beside her. It looked like Rocco. Jack gently reached out, not to take the paper, just to lower it so he could see her face better. "Ava," he said quietly, "can you tell me what happened?" She leaned in close to Rocco, almost hiding behind him, and then she whispered, "He wants to hurt Mommy." Jack didn't blink, didn't move, just let the words settle. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Monroe. I have a found child, female, approximately 5 years old, on East Ridge Road near mile marker 17. She's safe. I need EMS, and notify Child Protective Services immediately. Possible domestic situation." "Copy that, Monroe. Medics en route. ETA 12 minutes. Do you need backup?" Jack looked at Ava. Her small hand now gripped the fur behind Rocco's ear. She wasn't crying anymore, just watching. "No backup for now," he replied. "Just tell them to hurry." Inside the patrol truck, Jack turned up the heat. Ava sat wrapped in his jacket, her feet tucked beneath her drawing still in her lap. Rocco sat next to her, not in the back where he usually rode. Jack had broken protocol. He didn't care. She still hadn't said much, just stared out the window. But every now and then, she'd glance at Rocco and whisper something Jack couldn't hear. "What's on that drawing, kiddo?" he asked gently. She turned it slightly toward him but didn't let go. "Mommy," she whispered. "Me. Rocco." Jack blinked. "That's Rocco." A nod. "You drew him before today?" Another nod. His throat tightened. "And the other person?" Ava's fingers curled against the paper, pressing into the black scribble. "He took us to the house with trees, but the roof is broken." "And Mommy cried?" Jack kept his voice steady. "Do you know where it is?" She pointed vaguely toward the north ridge. "That way." "What color is the house?" "Gray." "Did Mommy say anyone's name?" "Derek," she whispered. Jack's stomach dropped. He knew that name. Derek Voss. An old arrest. An even older sealed file. A dishonorable discharge. A man with a history of quiet violence and vanishing records. The sound of approaching sirens broke the silence. Jack looked in the rearview mirror and saw the EMS vehicle turn the corner. Ava stiffened. "It's okay," Jack said quickly. "They're here to help." But she wasn't looking at the ambulance. She was looking at him. "Will you come with me?" she asked. Jack paused, then nodded. "I'll stay with you as long as you want, Ava." She nodded once, slowly, as if that answer mattered more than anything else. After the medics checked her, minor bruises, slight dehydration, nothing urgent, Jack made a decision. He radioed in again. "Bring someone from Child Services directly to Birchwood Station. I'll meet them there." Then he looked at Ava. "Let's go find your mom, all right?" She didn't speak, but her hand reached for his again. Rocco moved beside her like a shadow, and together they drove back down the road. Three souls who didn't yet understand that today wasn't just a patrol route or a missing persons call. Today was the beginning of something else. A whisper had opened the door. But the storm was still waiting in the woods. She hadn't spoken in 15 minutes, but when they checked her jacket pocket, the drawing said everything. At Birchwood Station, the lighting was always a little too harsh. The fluorescent bulbs flickered just enough to be noticeable, but not quite enough to justify replacing. Officer Jack Monroe had never liked it. The whole place smelled like old coffee, dried pine cleaner, and a lingering tension you could never quite wash off. He held Ava in his arms as they entered. She hadn't said a word since they left the side of the road. Her tiny fingers gripped the collar of his uniform, her face buried against his shoulder. Rocco walked beside them, his gait steady, his eyes on the girl more than on the door. Everyone turned to look. Sergeant Holloway raised an eyebrow. "What have you got there, Monroe?" Jack didn't stop walking. "Call CPS, now, and get someone to prep interview room B, gently." "You okay?" Holloway asked, catching the shift in Jack's voice. "No," Jack said, "but she's alive, and that's something." He led her down the hall, past the usual clatter of phones and reports, to a small, quiet room with 2 chairs and a glass wall that always made people feel more watched than safe. He didn't want that, so he veered into the break room instead. Empty for now. The humming refrigerator and buzzing soda machine were the only sounds. He set Ava down gently on the couch in the corner, then knelt in front of her. "You're safe here, okay?" he said softly. Ava nodded but didn't speak. She was still wearing his patrol jacket. It draped over her like a blanket, far too big, but she didn't seem to mind. Her feet were tucked under her, pink and dusty from the gravel road. Jack stood and grabbed a blanket from the storage closet. When he returned, he saw her digging into the side pocket of the jacket. "Ava?" he asked, careful not to startle her. She pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled, torn at one edge and smeared with crayon. It wasn't the same one as before. This one was worse. 3 stick figures again, 2 smiling, 1 scribbled out entirely. But this time the background had changed. Jagged lines for trees, a black square that might have been a house, and in red, thick, almost aggressively drawn, a figure lying on the ground with X's for eyes. One of the smiling figures stood nearby, holding a leash attached to what looked like a dog. Rocco. Jack's throat closed. "Where did you draw this?" he asked gently. Ava's voice was no louder than the hum of the vending machine. "In the closet, when he was yelling." He swallowed hard. "You drew this when you were hiding?" She nodded. The door opened slowly. It was Marcy Lynn from Child Protective Services. She was in her early 30s, soft-spoken but firm, with the kind of presence that made children lean in instead of pull away. Her scarf was too colorful for the room. That was on purpose. Jack rose. "Marcy, you found her?" "She found us," Jack corrected. Marcy smiled warmly and approached the girl with practiced gentleness. "Hi, Ava. I'm Marcy. I help kids when things get scary. Is it okay if I sit with you?" Ava looked at Jack. He nodded, so she nodded too. Jack stepped back, letting Marcy take the lead, but he didn't leave the room. Neither did Rocco. Half an hour later, Marcy emerged from the break room, her face pale. She looked at Jack with a heaviness he recognized all too well. "She's telling the same story," Marcy said. "Gray house, broken roof, in the trees. A man named Derek." "She say anything about where it is?" Marcy shook her head. "She doesn't know the name of the road. She doesn't remember the last time she saw sunlight, but she remembered the sound of water, a stream, and a smell like firewood." Jack nodded slowly. "That narrows it." Marcy tilted her head. "Does it?" "It does if you've lived here long enough," he said. "East of Highway 8, there's a patch of forest that borders Willow Creek. Some old hunting cabins, most of them collapsed or squatted. No electric lines. Most people forgot they're even there." "You think he took her out there?" "I think he's been hiding her there for weeks." Marcy's voice tightened. "She says her mom was bleeding last time she saw her." Jack didn't blink. "Then we don't wait." Jack pulled out the dusty forestry maps from storage. Most hadn't been updated in decades, but he knew the terrain better than most. He'd run it, hunted it, trained in it, and sometimes escaped to it. He circled 4 possible locations on the map. Here, 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 and this one. That's where I'd go if I didn't want to be found. Sergeant Holloway stepped in, reading over his shoulder. "You sure about this?" Jack nodded. "No one's reported a gray house with a broken roof because no one's supposed to be living there. That's the point. It's off-grid. No records. Perfect place to disappear a family." "You want backup?" "I want quiet backup," Jack said. "1 unit, no sirens. Bring infrared scopes and trauma kits." Holloway nodded. "You got it." Jack turned to Marcy. "Keep Ava here. Don't let her out of sight. She talks to the dog more than people, so let Rocco stay with her." Marcy hesitated. "He's trained for combat. He's trained to protect, and she trusts him." A pause. Then Marcy knelt beside Rocco. "What do you say, hero? You babysitting?" Rocco gave one soft bark. Ava smiled. As Jack strapped on his vest and checked his gear, he paused to look at the drawing again. The one Ava had made. The one with the house and the dog and the X-eyed figure. It wasn't just a picture. It was a map. She couldn't read a compass. She didn't know north from south. But she had drawn the slope of the trees, the curve of the creek, even the fallen log in the corner. He turned the paper sideways, then upside down. Then he saw it. A pattern. A trail. And at the end of it, what looked like a square with a small circle beside it. "Fire pit," he muttered. He looked up. I know where she was. Back at the station, Ava sat curled up on the couch again, Rocco beside her, her hand resting on his fur like it was the only safe place left in the world. She had drawn new pictures. This time they were flowers, and the sun, and her mom's face, smiling, and always, always, Rocco. The trail east of Highway 8 was barely a trail anymore. It twisted through thickets of brittle brush and steep, uneven soil, a fading path once carved out by loggers and long since reclaimed by the forest. Fallen branches cracked underfoot. The late afternoon light spilled through the trees in thin, golden beams, cutting across the fog like ghosts trying to show the way. Jack Monroe had hiked this part of Birchwood's woods before, but never with this much weight pressing down on his chest. He moved quietly, his rifle slung across his back and a flashlight in hand. Behind him followed Officer Taylor and Deputy Mendez, both chosen for their silence more than their muscle. No sirens, no lights, just boots, breath, and broken silence. Ava's drawing was folded inside Jack's pocket. He'd looked at it again just before they left, turning it until the shadows and lines made sense. She had drawn with a kind of urgent memory. Not perfect detail, but something even deeper. Instinct. The curve of the trail matched her sketch. The fallen tree near a sharp bend, exactly where she placed it. And then, after nearly an hour of quiet movement, Jack saw it. "Stop," he whispered. The team froze. Just ahead, veiled in pine and shadow, was a structure that barely looked like it deserved the name. A sagging cabin, gray and splintered, its tin roof half collapsed, one side caved in entirely. No electricity, no windows intact, and no noise, no smoke, no light. Jack raised his hand and moved forward alone. The silence was not peace. It was coiled, waiting. He scanned the area, a rusted fire pit, burnt logs and empty cans scattered around a half-dug ditch. A trail of boot prints disappeared around the corner of the cabin. Jack raised his fist again. "Wait." Then he crept forward, stepped up onto the warped wooden porch, and listened. Nothing. He knocked once with the back of his flashlight. Still nothing. He tried the door. It opened with a groan that sliced the stillness like a scream. Inside, the air was stale, thick with mildew, smoke, and something darker. He stepped in, and then his heart sank. The shack looked like a place time had abandoned, but violence hadn't. Ripped blankets, duct tape, a cracked lantern, a metal folding chair bent out of shape. One corner had rope tied to an iron pipe driven into the floor. Blood. Not fresh, but not old either. On the far wall, the word "Shut up" was carved deep into the wooden planks. Jack's flashlight scanned to the left. A shattered phone, wires torn out. Scorched paper fragments littered the floor. "Jack," Officer Taylor whispered from the porch. "Over here." Jack moved outside, following her voice to the back of the cabin. There, nailed to the outer wall, half covered in dried moss, was a photograph. It was ripped, the right edge missing, but the left half told everything. Claire Bennett, holding Ava, smiling. A third person stood beside them, a large man with a thick frame and pale eyes. But his face had been scratched out, not just with a marker, but something sharper. Again and again. Rage lived in this photo. Jack took it in his gloved hand. That's them. Taylor looked at him. Claire and Ava? Jack nodded slowly. This confirms it. This was the holding site. Deputy Mendez stepped around the corner. Tracks head east. Looks like he moved her. The prints are recent. Heavy boot, size 13. One set. One victim? No smaller prints. Could have carried her. Jack's jaw tightened. He knew we were coming. Back at Birchwood Station, Ava sat in the corner of the interview room with a coloring book someone had found in storage. She wasn't using it. Instead, she was drawing again on printer paper. The picture was different this time. The stick figures were standing on grass. One had a bandage. One had a badge. The dog was there. And in the sky, Ava had drawn a smiling sun with big eyes. "Did you find the gray house?" she asked, almost whispering. Marcy Lynn glanced at Rocco, then knelt beside Ava. "They found it, sweetheart." Ava's eyes didn't look up. "Is Mommy there?" Marcy hesitated. "Not yet. But they're looking right now." Ava picked up a yellow crayon and began to color in the sun. Rocco laid down at her feet. Jack stared at the photograph in his hand. They'd sealed the cabin. Evidence markers were down. Forensics would arrive by morning. But Jack didn't want to wait. He stood in the hallway of the station, pacing outside the conference room where the photo sat under a plastic evidence bag. He couldn't stop thinking about the blood on the pipe. How many nights had Claire sat tied there, listening to the wind, hoping someone would hear? How many nights had Ava drawn her way through fear, while her mother screamed into silence? He felt sick. He turned as someone approached. A woman, her black coat dusted with snow, a badge clipped to her belt. Detective Sarah Vega. She extended her hand. "Heard you stirred up a sealed case." Jack nodded, shaking her hand. "Thanks for coming." "You called about Derek Voss?" Claire Bennett's old file had his name on it. Ava mentioned it again. "We just found a probable holding site, deep woods." "Unregistered. And Claire's missing." Sarah's mouth hardened. "I remember Claire. I was a junior officer then. She filed for a protection order. It got lost in the system. Or maybe someone let it get lost." Jack didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. Sarah continued. "Voss was discharged for misconduct, covered up by a superior. His abuse record was sealed. His last known residence was a trailer near Fort Peary, but he disappeared 6 months ago." "He's here now," Jack said. "Somewhere." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Then let's find the bastard." At 2:13 a.m., a report came in over the radio. "Ranger Station 9 reports red SUV abandoned in the brush. License plates removed. Strong smell of fire and oil." Jack sat up instantly. He grabbed the map again. If the SUV was abandoned near the North Ranger post, then... He drew a mental line from the shack, east, to Willow Creek. A remote area, narrow trails, and dozens of small hunting shelters scattered along the water. Most of them forgotten, many of them invisible to satellite view. He circled one on the map. "There." Sarah peered over his shoulder. You think he moved her again? I think he's trying to cover tracks, but he's running out of places to go. Jack didn't sleep. He sat on the station steps as dawn broke, watching the sun cut across the valley like a blade of light through memory. He pulled out Ava's first drawing again, the one with the scribbled face. He held it beside the photo of Claire and Ava, and in that moment, it was so clear. Ava hadn't drawn fear. She had drawn a warning. Jack Monroe hadn't showered in nearly 36 hours. He stood in the Birchwood Precinct's evidence room under flickering light, staring down at a folder with his name scrawled across the top. It wasn't new. It was a ghost pulled from archives that had been collecting dust in the basement. Claire Bennett. Domestic abuse report filed 7 years ago. A short handwritten note attached to the front. Subject claims fear for life, requesting emergency protection. But the box next to it was stamped in red, unprocessed. Jack gritted his teeth and flipped it open. Photos, grainy, old, and still sharp enough to punch. Bruises along Claire's jawline. A split lip. Medical forms never followed up. Statements from neighbors that said, "We heard yelling," and "she wouldn't let him near the child." And then there was the name. Derek Voss. Ex-military. Honorably enlisted. Dishonorably discharged. His record was a patchwork. Pieces missing. Incidents erased. Assault allegations that vanished mid-investigation. One formal charge for domestic violence, dismissed for lack of evidence. Technical error, they said. But Claire had known. Ava had known. And now Jack knew. Sarah Vega entered quietly, sipping from a chipped coffee mug. I remember when she filed that. I was 2 months into the DV unit. I begged my supervisor to escalate it. Jack looked at her. Why didn't they? Sarah's jaw tightened. Voss's brother-in-law was a state patrol commander. He pulled strings, said it was a misunderstanding. Claire was labeled emotionally unstable. Her request disappeared. Jack's stomach turned. She wasn't unstable. She was cornered. Sarah nodded. And now we're years too late. But not entirely. Jack tapped the desk. She's still alive. We have to believe that. The red SUV had been found deep in the brush near Ranger Station 9, covered in pine needles and dried mud, no plates, no prints. But there was something else. In the glove box, a knife. Wiped, but not clean enough. Forensics picked up traces of blood. DNA rushed to the lab. And in the back seat, a single child's shoe. Size 11, pink sole, yellow strap. Jack recognized it instantly. It matched the one Ava wore when they found her. By late afternoon, Jack, Sarah, and a tactical team were assembled in the operations room. Maps spread across the table. A laptop pinged softly with each new data input. We've narrowed it down to the Willow Creek line, Jack said. If Voss was planning to vanish again, he'd go to the water. He was trained for it. Survivalist mindset. Sarah leaned in. Then we have to think like him. What would he expect? Noise, sirens, searchlights. Then we give him none of that. Jack agreed. They would split the team. One unit would search the creek from the north bend down. Jack and Sarah would approach from the south. Rocco would lead. Because the truth was, Ava still trusted the dog more than anyone. And if there was any scent to follow, Rocco would find it. Before leaving, Jack walked down the quiet hallway to interview room B. Ava was there with Marcy, drawing again. This time a new picture. 3 people and a dog sitting under a tree. Marcy looked up. She had a nightmare. Woke up crying for her mom. Ava stood when Jack entered. Are you gonna go? Jack knelt down. Yeah, we're going to find her, Ava. I promise. Ava didn't blink. He hurts her. I know. She pointed at Rocco. He's brave. Jack looked at the dog. Yeah, he really is. Then Ava reached into her stack of drawings and pulled one out. Carefully folded, newer, more deliberate. She handed it to Jack. He opened it. It was a map. Her version of the woods drawn from memory. But in the far corner, she'd added something she hadn't before, a small square with smoke drawn rising above it. He has a fire there, she whispered. Every night. It smells like burnt socks. Jack looked up sharply. You remember that? Ava nodded. And one time, Mommy screamed, but then she stopped. The room went still. Jack placed the map into his vest pocket like it was gospel. I'll bring her home. Ava looked at Rocco. You promise to? The dog walked over and laid his head on her lap. That was answer enough. The sun was setting as Jack and Sarah hiked through the forest, the pine needles underfoot soft and soundless. Rocco walked ahead, his nose low, his posture focused. Every so often he paused, ears perked, sniffed again, and continued. Jack checked the map, both Ava's and the real one. The stream curved just ahead. The slope rose sharply after that. If Ava was right, the shack would be just beyond the bend. Sarah whispered behind him. Do you hear that? Jack stopped. Yes, a crackle. Faint, barely more than a whisper. Smoke. They moved quickly but carefully. At the crest of the hill, Jack dropped to one knee and peered through the scope. There it was. A shelter built with logs and tarps, like something out of a survival manual. Smoke coiled from a crude chimney made from a rusted exhaust pipe. No lights, no movement, just the smell of burning. Jack pointed. Claire's in there. Sarah raised her radio. Team Alpha, converge on coordinate point 6B. Target structure confirmed. No sirens, Jack added. We don't spook him. The approach was fast and silent. Rocco froze first, his body rigid. Jack followed his gaze. A figure had emerged from behind the shack, dragging a bundle of cloth. Claire. She was conscious, barely. Arms bound, face bruised, limping. And Derek Voss stood behind her, dragging her like a sack. Scar down his right cheek, shaved head, thick arms covered in military tattoos. He didn't see them yet. Jack stepped out from the trees, gun raised. Drop her! Now! Voss spun. Claire collapsed to the ground. Don't come closer, Voss barked. Rocco growled low. Sarah flanked left. You're surrounded, Derek. Let her go. I let her go. You shoot me. No, Jack said coldly. You're not worth a bullet. Voss hesitated, then reached for Claire. That was all Rocco needed. The dog shot forward like a lightning bolt, snarling, teeth bared. He lunged, not for the kill, but for the arm. The gun in Voss's hand flew out of reach. He screamed, tackled, cuffed, done. Jack rushed to Claire, who was gasping, half-conscious, whispering one word. Ava? Jack knelt beside her. She's safe. She found us. Claire sobbed. A ragged, broken sound that tore through the forest. You're safe, too, Jack whispered. You're safe. That night, as the ambulance pulled away with Claire under blankets and oxygen, Jack leaned against the patrol truck and looked up at the stars. Sarah stood beside him. You've been carrying this, she said softly. Jack nodded. It started with a whisper and ended with a girl who wouldn't let the world forget her mother. Jack didn't speak, but in his pocket, Ava's map still sat, folded, smudged, but true. And that was enough. He used her as a shield. But the dog didn't hesitate, not for a second. And in that moment, a 5-year-old girl's whisper turned into salvation. The shack was barely a structure, more a collection of scavenged wood, tarp, and desperation. It leaned like it might fall over if someone exhaled too hard. Smoke drifted from the chimney pipe in lazy spirals. There were no signs, no mailbox, no path. Only pine needles and ash. Jack Monroe crouched behind a thicket of brush, eyes fixed on the clearing 20 feet ahead. His breathing was slow, calculated, but his pulse was pounding. Claire Bennett was somewhere inside. The last radio transmission had confirmed it. Movement spotted, female, restrained. A thermal scan showed one stationary heat signature, slumped near the back of the shack. Another figure, heavier, pacing. Derek Voss. Jack whispered into his mic, "Eyes up. No entry until I say. We do this clean. No mistakes." Sarah Vega, crouched beside him, nodded silently. Rocco sat between them, low to the ground, muscles taut like a drawn bow. This wasn't a standard arrest. This was the exhale after years of silence. This was a reckoning. And it was about to begin. Inside the shack, Claire's eyes fluttered open. Everything hurt. Her wrists burned from the rope, her lips cracked from dehydration, and every bone in her body felt like it belonged to someone else. But her mind was still clear enough to whisper one thing to herself, again and again. Ava, Ava, Ava. The room smelled of smoke and sweat. A single lantern flickered on a makeshift shelf. Derek moved around the room with slow, methodical steps, cleaning a knife, checking a small burner stove, pouring canned beans into a rusted pot. "I heard the dogs last night," he muttered. "Bet they've got your name all over the radio now, huh?" Claire didn't answer. She'd learned not to. He crouched in front of her, gripping her jaw. "You think I don't know what you're doing? That little rat you call a daughter ran off, didn't she?" Claire didn't flinch. His grip tightened. "Answer me." She stared at him, eyes steady. "She's not a rat. She's a lion." He raised his hand and stopped. A sound outside. A branch snap. He rose quickly, grabbed Claire by the shoulders and yanked her upright. She stumbled, barely able to stand. "You're coming with me," he growled, dragging her toward the door. Outside, Jack saw it all unfold in slow motion. Voss exited the shack with Claire in a chokehold, one arm around her neck, the other hand holding a jagged switchblade close to her ribs. Jack raised his voice, calm and steady. "Derek, let her go." Voss's eyes scanned the trees. "I see you." "Cop, I'll gut her. Don't think I won't." "Put the knife down. You think this is gonna end with you looking good? You let me walk out of here, she lives." Sarah moved through the underbrush, quietly flanking to the left. Another officer moved right, but Jack stayed in the open. "No one's walking out of here with a hostage," he said. Voss jerked Claire tighter. She cried out in pain. Then a low growl rumbled across the clearing. Rocco. Jack gave one hand signal, subtle, almost invisible. The dog lowered his body into the grass. "Last chance," Jack said. "Let her go." "You're bluffing." Jack looked at Claire. "Hold still." Then, Rocco sprang, a blur of brown and muscle and fury. Voss turned just as the dog launched himself at the arm holding the knife, jaws locking with surgical precision. Claire collapsed to the ground, gasping. Voss screamed, staggering back. Sarah was already moving. She tackled him low. The knife fell. 2 officers were on him in seconds, knees to his back. Cuffs snapping. "Clear!" someone shouted. "Medic!" Jack called out. He was already at Claire's side, lifting her gently into his arms. She was conscious, barely, but her eyes were filled with something Jack hadn't seen in her yet. Relief. He whispered, "Ava's safe." Her lips moved. She got away?" "She found us. She saved you." Claire closed her eyes. The ambulance ride was quiet except for the constant beeping of monitors. Claire was given fluids and oxygen, her injuries stabilized. She barely spoke, only muttering Ava's name again and again. At one point, Jack reached out and gently took her hand. "She's waiting," he said softly. "She never gave up on you." Claire squeezed his fingers, the tiniest pressure. It was enough. Back at Birchwood Station, Marcy Lynn sat with Ava in the quiet room near the window. The sun was setting in streaks of lavender and gold, and Ava was watching the light dance across the floor tiles. She hadn't spoken in hours. Rocco lay beside her, his fur still matted with forest dust. She traced her finger across his back absent-mindedly, her small frame curled under a blanket. Then the phone rang. Marcy answered it quickly. She listened, then turned. "Ava." The little girl looked up. Marcy smiled. "They found her." Ava blinked. "She's safe. She's at the hospital now. Do you want to go see her?" Ava stood without a word. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But she took Rocco's leash in her hand. When they arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center, it was already night. The halls were dim and hushed. Jack stood in the lobby waiting. Ava saw him and ran. He dropped to one knee just in time to catch her. "She's okay," he whispered, hugging her tightly. Rocco leaned into them, pressing his head against Ava's back. "She asked about you," Jack said. "She kept saying your name." Ava looked up. "Can I see her?" Jack nodded. Room 214. Claire Bennett had tubes in her arms and bruises on her face. But when the door opened and she saw her daughter walk in, barefoot, hair tangled, carrying a dog leash, her face broke. "Ava," she whispered. Ava ran to her, arms outstretched. The nurse tried to intervene, but Claire was already reaching. They held each other and didn't let go. Not for 5 seconds. Not for 5 minutes. Not until the nurse came back and gently asked if Ava wanted to stay the night. Ava looked at Jack. "Can Rocco stay too?" Jack smiled. "I'll talk to the staff." Later that night, Jack stood outside room 214, watching through the window. Ava had curled beside her mother in the hospital bed, her small frame pressed against Claire's side. Rocco was on the floor, tail twitching. And for the first time since the whisper on the side of the road, Jack saw peace. Not perfect peace, but earned peace. The kind you only find after walking through fire and surviving it. Room 214 sat at the quiet end of the third-floor wing at St. Mary's Medical Center, where the walls were painted a faded blue meant to be calming, but instead made the air feel still, like time wasn't sure whether to move forward or hold its breath. Jack Monroe stood just outside the door. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't needed to. Through the narrow glass window, he could see them. Claire lay in the hospital bed, IV taped to her arm, a cotton blanket pulled up to her chest. Her eyes were closed, but her hand rested gently atop a small head of tangled blonde hair. Ava. She had curled up beside her mother, wrapped in the hospital-issued blanket, her face buried against Claire's shoulder, and one of her little hands, small and scraped and trembling even in sleep, clutched the edge of Claire's gown like it was an anchor. Rocco lay curled on the floor next to the bed. His eyes were half closed, but every few minutes his ears flicked toward the hallway, ever alert. Jack finally exhaled. He stepped away from the door. Earlier that day, Claire had woken slowly, the beeping of machines and the soft rustle of nurses around her like the lull before memory returned. And when it did, it was sudden, sharp. She jolted upright, pain slicing through her ribs. "Ava," she croaked, but Ava was already there. The little girl had been asleep in a chair beside the bed, and when she heard her mother's voice, she scrambled forward and climbed carefully onto the mattress. "I'm here." "Mommy," she whispered. Claire burst into tears. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, broken sound, the kind that came from places no one else could see. Ava didn't cry. She just held her mother and whispered, "I found the nice officer. I found Rocco. I drew maps. I remembered the roof was broken." Claire kissed the top of her head. "You saved me, baby." Ava nodded like it was obvious. "I didn't want you to be alone." That afternoon, the hospital let Jack into the room for a short visit. He stood at the foot of the bed, suddenly unsure of how to speak. Claire looked at him, her voice raspy but clear. "You were the one who found her?" Jack nodded. "She was by the road?" Claire asked. "Yes, holding a drawing." Claire smiled faintly. "She always draws when she's scared." "She didn't cry," Jack said quietly. "Not once. She just whispered, 'He wants to hurt Mommy.' That's when everything changed." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "He almost did." "But he didn't," Jack said. "You're here. And she's here. And he's in custody." Claire's voice trembled. "I thought if I disappeared, he'd never find her." "You tried to protect her," Jack said gently. Claire looked away. "But she ended up saving me." Jack stepped forward and placed something on the nightstand. Folded paper, crumpled edges, bright crayon colors, Ava's map. Claire reached for it with her good hand and opened it. The tears came again, but this time they weren't jagged. They flowed like release. "She remembered this?" Claire whispered. "She remembered everything," Jack said. There was a long silence. Then Claire looked at him, eyes tired but focused. "How did you know where to look?" Jack shrugged slightly. "We just listened to her. And to Rocco." At the sound of his name, Rocco lifted his head and wagged his tail once. Claire smiled. "She says he's magic." Jack looked at the dog. She might be right. Later that evening, Ava insisted on helping the nurse push Claire's dinner tray closer. She carried a plastic cup of apple juice with both hands, tongue poking out in concentration. "I don't spill any more," she declared proudly. Claire chuckled softly. "You've grown up." "I'm 5 now," Ava said. "I helped a police dog and drew maps." "That's like 10 years old." Jack laughed from the corner of the room. Ava turned to him. "Do you have kids?" Jack's smile faded slightly. "No, just Rocco." "Then you can share me," Ava said simply. Claire looked at Jack, startled, but he just nodded. "I'd like that." The nurse came in around 9 p.m. and told Ava it was time to sleep. Claire looked concerned, not wanting her daughter taken far, but Marcy Lynn stepped in with a solution, a fold-out cot placed at the foot of the bed. Rocco curled up beneath it. Ava crawled under the blanket with her coloring book. and whispered to Rocco for a few minutes before falling asleep mid-sentence. Jack stayed a while longer, quiet, watchful. When he finally stood to leave, Claire called out softly, "Jack?" He turned. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Thank you for believing her." Jack nodded. It wasn't hard. Then he left. But not really. The next few days passed in gentle rhythm. Claire regained her strength. Ava never left her side. Doctors came and went. A social worker from Great Falls stopped by. Paperwork was signed, statements taken, prosecutors informed. Detective Sarah Vega visited once and gave Claire a quiet hug. "You're not invisible anymore," she whispered. Claire didn't answer, but Ava smiled. One morning, Jack walked in to find Ava sitting cross-legged on the hospital bed with a stack of drawings. "This one's you," she told him, holding up a stick figure in a brown uniform. "This one's Rocco." Rocco's figure had a badge and a cape. "And this one is my family," she said, showing him the last picture. 3 people and a dog, holding hands under a giant tree. Jack swallowed hard. "That's beautiful." Claire looked at him over Ava's shoulder. For a second, the room felt still in a new way. Not heavy like before. Just full of something healing, full of something growing. That night, Ava fell asleep gripping her mom's hand again. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Rocco sighed in his sleep. Claire turned to Jack, who sat in the corner reading. "She still won't let go," she said softly. Jack closed the book and set it down. "She will. When she knows the world won't take you away again." Claire looked at her daughter, her fingers curled tight around hers. Then she whispered, "Maybe it won't." And Jack didn't say anything. He just stayed. Because sometimes presence said more than any promise ever could. The car ride was quiet. Rocco sat in the back seat with Ava, her tiny hand resting on his head as if it belonged there, as if it always had. Claire stared out the passenger window, her fingers absent-mindedly twisting the fabric of her shirt. Her bruises had faded, but some aches, the kind that didn't show up on scans, had only just begun. They passed old farmland, wide sky, a grocery store Claire vaguely remembered from years ago. But when they turned onto the gravel road that led to Rose Hill Haven, she felt it before she saw it. Safety. The shelter was nothing like she'd imagined. No harsh concrete, no steel bars, no echoes. Just a white cottage tucked between tall birch trees, wildflowers blooming on either side of the walkway, a red wooden door that looked hand-painted. The kind of place a child might draw with crayons. Ava whispered from the back seat, "This looks like the house in my dream." Jack, driving them, looked at her in the mirror. "I think you dreamed it into real." Claire smiled for the first time in days. Not because everything was okay, but because something was finally beginning. Linda Mayfield opened the front door before they could knock. She wasn't what Claire expected. No clipboard, no business suit. Just a woman in her 60s with gray-streaked curls, wearing jeans and a soft flannel shirt. Her voice was low, grounded, like someone who had seen fire and stayed calm. "You must be Claire," she said, "and this brave one is Ava." Ava didn't speak, but she stepped forward and held out a folded piece of paper. It was another drawing, the cottage, with hearts around it. Linda smiled. "I've been waiting for you." She led them inside. The interior of Rose Hill was warm, lived in. A long wooden dining table stretched under hanging lights, each bulb different from the others. A bookshelf towered against the wall, stacked with fiction and children's books, puzzles, and worn coloring books. In the corner, a small play area with blocks, dolls, and stuffed animals. No TVs, no sterile plastic, just softness. Linda showed them to their room, 2 beds side by side with matching quilts, pale green walls, a window overlooking a small garden. Claire dropped her bag and sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Ava climbed up beside her. "This one can be mine?" Claire nodded. "Whichever one you want." Then Ava added, "But we sleep together the first night, right?" Claire smiled. "Always." That evening, Linda gathered with the other women in the sunroom. 4 residents, 2 children, and 1 silent old cat who occupied the windowsill like a king. Claire sat at the edge of the circle. Ava sat on the floor with a toy bunny. Rocco stretched beside her like a guardian statue. Linda spoke first, voice quiet but steady. "This is a place where we speak if we want, and stay silent if we need. No one here will ask you to tell your story before you're ready." Claire didn't speak, but she listened. One woman talked about a husband who never raised his voice but made her ask for permission to breathe. Another shared how the police called her dramatic when she reported being locked in her own basement. No one cried. It wasn't a sobbing room. It was something deeper, a place where silence meant trust, not fear. When it was Claire's turn, she shook her head. "Not yet." Linda nodded. "That's okay." The next morning, Ava joined the local preschool program partnered with the shelter. The classroom was 2 blocks away, inside a converted church with a rainbow mural on the wall. Claire watched from the door as Ava hesitated, then saw the art table. She walked straight toward it, picked up a crayon, and began to draw. The teacher smiled. "She's going to be just fine." Claire wasn't so sure about herself. In the days that followed, routines formed like stitches pulling wounds closed. Claire helped in the communal kitchen, cutting vegetables beside women who used to flinch at the sound of a door slamming. She walked in the garden with Ava every morning, pointing out new buds, watching her daughter laugh again. Not just a little, but full, deep belly laughter. Rocco became something of a legend around the shelter. He walked the hallways like he owned them, slept beside any crying child, and once barked at the television when it showed a fight scene. The women called him the unofficial counselor. One Thursday afternoon, Claire sat in the therapy room with Linda. Just the 2 of them. No notebook, no clipboard. Linda handed her a small clay figure, just a lump with a few dents in it. "Made by a girl who stayed here 2 years ago," she said. "She said it was a heart that had been stepped on." Claire turned it over in her hands. "I didn't mean for Ava to see any of it," she said. "I know. I thought if I left, if I hid." Linda waited. Claire swallowed. "I thought if she never saw his face again, maybe she wouldn't remember mine like that either." Linda didn't interrupt. "She drew pictures every day," Claire continued. "She never screamed, never cried, but every time I looked at her, I could see what she was carrying." Linda nodded slowly. "She didn't carry it alone." Claire's voice broke. "I wish she hadn't carried it at all." Linda leaned forward. "You kept her alive, and she kept your hope alive. That's not failure. That's a bond most people never understand." Claire didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. That night, Ava climbed into bed beside Claire and whispered, "I think we can stay here forever." Claire smoothed her hair. "Maybe not forever, but for now, yes." Ava asked, "Will Jack come visit?" "I think so." "And Rocco?" "He'll definitely visit." Then Ava rolled over, hugged her bunny tight, and said one last thing before falling asleep. "I'm not scared of trees anymore." Claire lay in the dark, her arm wrapped around her daughter, her eyes wide open. She had always thought survival meant hiding, but maybe healing meant staying. On Sunday morning, Jack came. He brought donuts, a stack of children's books, and Rocco, who ran straight to Ava and knocked her over in a blur of tail wags and joy. Claire stepped onto the porch as Jack leaned against the rail, coffee in hand. She stood beside him, arms crossed. They watched Ava chase Rocco through the wildflowers. "She seems lighter," Jack said. Claire nodded. "It's like something left her, something I carried for too long." He looked at her. "And you?" Claire exhaled. "I'm still learning. But I don't wake up afraid anymore." Jack turned toward her slowly. "That matters." They didn't say anything for a while, and when Claire finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I told the group. Ava saved me." Jack nodded. "I believe that." Claire looked down at her hands. "But I also think we were meant to be found. Me. Her. Even you." Jack's breath caught. He didn't show it. Then Ava came running up the steps barefoot, holding a crayon drawing of the three of them and Rocco under a giant sun. "Uncle Jack," she said, breathless, "do you want to be in my next picture?" Jack knelt beside her. "Only if you put me next to the dog." Ava grinned. "Deal." Whispering Hill wasn't marked on any map. Locals just knew it. A patch of high meadow overlooking Birchwood Valley, where wild grasses grew taller than children, and the wind sounded like it was telling secrets through the leaves. If you sat still long enough, you could hear the whole town breathe from up there, the hum of tractors, the river winding below, the soft whistle of the train 2 counties over. It was the place you went when you didn't want to be seen, but needed to feel everything. Which was why Jack chose it. He parked his truck at the base of the hill, the sun already casting long, honey-colored shadows across the dirt path. Rocco leapt out first, nose to the breeze, tail wagging like he remembered this place. Claire stepped out next, adjusting her scarf and reaching into the back seat for the picnic basket. Ava was right behind her, barefoot again by choice, her sundress flaring in the warm wind, a crayon drawing already folded in her hand. "We remembered the juice boxes, right?" Ava asked. Jack grinned. "I wouldn't survive this trip without them." They hiked slowly, the path gently curving upward, the sun kissing their backs. Ava ran ahead at times, stopping to examine every patch of daisies, every beetle, every crooked stick that might become a fairy wand. Claire kept pace with Jack. A little slower, more thoughtful. "You come here often?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Back when I didn't want to talk about anything." She glanced sideways. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Still don't. But I figured if anyone could convince me, it'd be a 5-year-old with a basket full of snacks." Claire chuckled. It came easily, like she wasn't even trying anymore. They reached the top just as the wind picked up, whispering through the wild grass. Ava spun in a slow circle, arms stretched wide, hair catching the light. "This is my favorite place," she declared. "You've never been here before," Claire teased. Ava shrugged. "It still is." They laid out the blanket near a twisted old tree, its roots half exposed, like it had decided long ago to stop pretending it belonged in the ground. Rocco settled beside Ava, who fed him little bites of sandwich between coloring sessions. Claire sat cross-legged, her knees brushing Jack's. They shared a bottle of lemonade and quiet stories about small-town emergencies, dogs who refused to retire, and how Ava once tried to color a whole wall green because she thought it felt too cold. Every now and then, Claire would glance at Jack when he wasn't looking, watching the way he listened, the way he never reached for her attention, only offered presence. Not all safety had to be loud. An hour passed. Then 2. Ava had found a patch of butterflies and was now chasing them through the tall grass, laughing in bright, echoing bursts. Claire shaded her eyes and watched her daughter. "I didn't think we'd get to this," she whispered. "To what?" Jack asked. "To a future. A moment without looking over our shoulders." Jack looked toward the horizon. "You're here now." Claire nodded slowly. "And you keep showing up." "I'll keep showing up," Jack said simply. There was no weight to it, no romantic pressure. Just a truth. And then her fingers brushed his, lightly, briefly, as they both reached for the same napkin. The contact was small, almost forgettable, but neither of them pulled away. Later, Ava crawled back onto the blanket and lay in Claire's lap, her thumb in her mouth, hair full of leaves. "Can we stay until it gets dark?" she asked sleepily. Claire ran her fingers through her daughter's curls. "You'll be cold by then." "I don't mind. You'll be tired." "I'm already tired." Claire smiled. "We'll stay a little longer." Jack looked at Ava. "Did you draw something today?" Ava perked up. "Yes, but you can't laugh." "I won't," he promised. She handed him the folded paper. He opened it carefully. It showed the hilltop, the tree, the blanket, Rocco, Ava, Claire, and Jack. In the corner, 4 big letters in crooked handwriting. M plus C plus A plus R. "Who's M?" he teased. "Mommy," Ava said. "And C?" "Claire," she replied seriously. "Who's A?" "Me, silly," he smiled. "And R?" Ava blinked. "Rocco. Duh." Jack looked at Claire, who was laughing now, a deep belly laugh she hadn't let out in years. "Looks like I'm the only one who didn't make the cut." Ava reached for the crayon and scribbled a 5th letter in the corner. J. "There," she said. "Now it's perfect." The wind picked up just as the sun began to dip below the ridge. Claire wrapped Ava in a blanket and pulled her close. Rocco lay across her feet like a heater. Jack packed up the food, folded the blanket, and took a slow breath. He wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. And then Ava whispered something, soft, like the wind itself. "I feel safe now, Mommy." Claire looked down, eyes stinging. "Me too, baby." They lingered a while longer, watching the sky turn to fire, then ash, then velvet. No one spoke. It wasn't silence. It was peace. And when they finally walked back down the hill, Ava on Jack's shoulders, Rocco trotting ahead, Claire watching them both, it felt like they weren't just returning from something. They were walking toward something new. She stood in court with her voice trembling, but not breaking. "He didn't take my daughter," Claire said, "and he didn't take me." The room went still. The courtroom in downtown Great Falls wasn't built for moments like this. It was built for order, for cold proceedings and polished wood and legal jargon that rarely matched real pain. But on this day, something cracked open inside its walls because Claire Bennett walked in, not as a victim, not even as a witness, but as a survivor. And every seat in the gallery was filled. Local media had picked up the story. Mother found alive after weeks in captivity. Daughter escapes, leads police to hidden shack. But headlines never told the real story. Not the drawings, not the dog, not the whisper that started it all. Jack Monroe sat in the second row, in uniform. Rocco lay quietly at his feet, a certified service animal now. Ava sat on Claire's lap in the gallery's front bench, her feet swinging, her small hand clutching her mother's. The trial of Derek Voss had begun. The prosecution laid out everything. Derek's dishonorable discharge, the sealed records of past abuse, the testimony from Claire's neighbors years ago, the discovery of the shack in the woods, the bruises documented at the hospital, and Ava's quiet, devastating statements through a child psychologist. But it wasn't the evidence that stunned the room. It was Claire. She stood slowly when called to the witness stand, her hands shaking as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Her voice, at first, was barely louder than the rain outside. I was 19 when I met him. I didn't know what danger looked like yet. The prosecutor gently guided her through the early years, the isolation, the slow breaking down, the pregnancy, the failed escape attempts, and the final time she vanished with Ava into the woods. She told them how Derek found them again, how he dragged them from a shelter 2 towns over, how he broke her phone, her ribs, her spirit. And then she paused. The courtroom was silent. Even Derek Voss, seated with his lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. Claire looked up. But then she found a pencil. Her voice grew stronger. She started drawing the places we passed. She remembered trees, hills, shadows. She memorized the sky. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But she didn't stop. She escaped when he was asleep. She made it to the road, and she found a dog, and an officer who listened. She turned slightly, her eyes landing on Jack. He didn't just find her. He believed her, and that's why I'm standing here. The prosecutor asked one final question. Claire, what would you want this court to understand today? Claire looked at the jury, at the judge, at her daughter. Her voice didn't tremble anymore. That he didn't take my daughter, and he didn't take me. We made it out. And with that, she stepped down. Later, during cross-examination, Derek's lawyer tried to poke holes. He suggested Claire's memory was trauma-colored, that her testimony was emotionally influenced. Jack had to grip the edge of his seat. But Claire didn't falter. Every time the defense tried to blame her for staying, for not calling sooner, for being emotionally unstable, Claire met them with quiet strength. She was 5, Claire said, looking at the jury. She wasn't unstable. She was scared, and she still saved me. Even the judge leaned forward. When Jack took the stand, he kept it simple. He told them about the first moment he saw Ava, barefoot, holding a crumpled drawing, whispering, "He wants to hurt Mommy." He told them how Rocco responded before any human did, how Ava trusted the dog more than anyone, how every clue she gave was right. She knew where she came from, Jack said. Even when the adults failed her, she kept pointing the way home. The prosecutor asked one question before releasing him. "What would you say she is, Deputy Monroe?" Jack looked straight ahead. "A hero." Rocco, officially recognized by the department, received a commendation from the local sheriff's office later that week. The video went viral, a little girl hugging a German shepherd while the town clapped. They gave him a medal. Ava gave him her sandwich. Both meant the same. After the trial, Claire and Ava walked out of the courthouse into the cold Montana sunlight. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But Claire didn't stop for any of them. She turned to Jack, who waited by the steps with Rocco. Then, without a word, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something folded, old, worn, carefully saved. She handed it to him. Jack unfolded the paper slowly. It was a photo. The one found at the shack, torn, burned at the edges, but this version had been taped back together, with one major difference. A new photo had been added beside it. Claire, Ava, Jack, and Rocco, on the porch at Rosehill, smiling. Claire whispered, "You found us." Jack looked up. "I think we were looking for you too," she said. Then she turned to Ava. "Ready to go home?" Ava looked up at the sky. "Which one?" Claire smiled. "Ours." That night, in a quiet corner of Birchwood Station, Jack took off his badge and set it on his desk, not because he was quitting, but because something was shifting. The case had shaken more than dust. It stirred questions about sealed records, about overlooked reports, about systems that listened too late. And Jack wasn't going to let that happen again. He'd already written the letter, requesting a new department program. Survivor-led education, trauma-informed training, and a dedicated child liaison. "Let's make sure the next Ava doesn't have to whisper," it read. Claire returned to Rosehill to say goodbye. Not because she needed to, because she wanted to. She hugged Linda Mayfield for a long time. "I thought I was running away from danger," she said quietly. "Turns out I was also running from kindness." Linda smiled. "You're not running anymore." Ava drew one last picture before they left. It showed a house on a hill, a garden, a son, a mother and daughter, a dog, and a man in a green uniform holding a book. On the front lawn was a tiny sign that read, "Safe Place." 6 months later, spring returned to Birchwood. It came slowly, almost shyly, with the first green blades pushing through frost, with the stubborn crocuses blooming in sidewalk cracks, and with the morning sun that no longer bit when it touched skin. On the edge of town, tucked behind an old orchard, sat a rental cottage with peeling white paint and a front porch that looked like it might sigh under too much weight. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. But to Claire and Ava, it was a kingdom. The porch held 2 chairs, 1 watering can, a chipped ceramic pot full of daisies, and most days, a dog. Rocco. He had practically moved in. Jack claimed he was just visiting, but the food bowl near the door and the chewed tennis ball in the yard suggested otherwise. Claire worked part-time now at Birchwood Elementary, assisting in the special needs classroom. Her mornings were filled with puzzles and crayons, her afternoons with student journals and soft voices trying to be heard. She was good at it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She knew what silence could mean. Ava was thriving. She walked to school every morning in rain boots and a too-big backpack, waving to every neighbor, sometimes holding Rocco's leash, sometimes skipping ahead to draw chalk hearts on the sidewalk before class. No one called her the girl from the woods anymore. She was just Ava. On the first warm Saturday of April, Claire stood on the porch brushing dust off an old welcome mat when she saw Jack's truck pull up the driveway. He stepped out with a familiar ease, 2 coffees in hand, and a folder tucked under one arm. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You bring paperwork to picnics now?" Jack grinned. "It's not paperwork." Ava, barefoot as usual, ran out the front door, arms wide. "Uncle Jack!" He handed Claire the coffees just in time to catch the full weight of the 5-year-old's tackle. Rocco barked once in greeting and then promptly rolled over in the grass, expecting belly rubs. Jack handed Ava a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked, suspicious. "You'll see." She opened it carefully, tearing just the corner. Inside was a homemade card, cut from construction paper, covered in crooked hearts and stars. On the front, written in crayon, Thank you for being our safe place. Inside was a drawing. Claire, Ava, Jack, and Rocco, standing in front of the little white house with the daisy pot and the crooked porch. Ava looked up. Did I draw your beard too big? Jack laughed. Probably. Claire watched the two of them, heart aching in the best possible way. It wasn't a fairy tale. There had been no magic wand, but somehow, step by step, page by page, they had written their own ending, and maybe even a beginning. That afternoon they had a picnic behind the house on a patch of sun-warmed grass. Ava chased butterflies with Rocco, giggling so hard she hiccuped. Claire stretched out on the blanket, eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of laughter and wind. Jack sat beside her, the unopened folder still resting near his knee. Eventually, she reached for it. He handed it to her without a word. Inside were 3 items. 1. A framed photo, the one Ava had drawn, printed professionally, with each figure carefully traced. 2. A copy of a letter typed, signed by the state board, confirming Ava's statements and Claire's court testimony, had helped reopen 6 sealed abuse cases. 3. A new document, a handwritten note. Claire read it slowly. To Claire Bennett and Ava. This town failed you once. May we never do so again. Thank you for your courage. Birchwood Sheriff's Department. Claire folded it gently and pressed it to her chest. She didn't say anything. But Jack saw her lips move. Thank you. That night, as twilight fell over the fields, Ava sat on the porch steps, head resting on Jack's arm, watching the stars blink into view. Do you think stars are safe? She asked. Jack looked up. I think they watch over people. Like Rocco? Exactly. Ava looked down at the dog curled beside her. Then Rocco must be made of stars. Claire joined them with a blanket over her shoulders, sitting close, so close their elbows touched without trying. And then, without warning, Ava asked, Is this our real family? Claire didn't speak. She looked at Jack. He blinked once, then twice. Then he said, without hesitation, Yes. Ava nodded like she already knew. Then she curled up between them and fell asleep, the stars still watching. In the weeks that followed, small things began to grow. Claire planted herbs along the windowsill. Jack repaired the porch railing. Ava taped drawings all over the fridge and started every morning with, Is today a Rocco day? They didn't call it a family, but they didn't need to. It simply was. One morning in May, Ava walked into the kitchen in her pajamas, holding something behind her back. Claire raised an eyebrow. What's that? Ava grinned. I made it at school. She held up a paper cutout. 3 hearts glued together. 1 red, 1 blue, 1 green. On each heart was a name. Mommy, Jack, me. Claire's throat tightened. That's beautiful, Ava added shyly. I think maybe we should keep him. Claire looked at Jack. He looked at her. Then he said softly, Only if you both want to. Claire crossed the room and placed her hand over his. We do. That night, as Jack locked up the truck and turned toward his own house down the road, Ava came running barefoot across the grass, holding something in her fist. Wait! He turned. What's up? She opened her hand. A daisy, a little crushed but still bright. For your pocket, she said. So you don't forget where home is. Jack knelt, took the flower gently, and tucked it into his chest pocket. I won't. As he walked back down the gravel path, stars beginning to appear, Rocco padded silently beside him. And behind them, laughter from the porch. A porch that had once belonged to no one, now filled with light, now filled with love, now, finally, home. Dear viewer, thank you for walking this journey with us, from a single whisper in the woods to healing, hope, and home. This story wasn't just about survival. It was about the quiet bravery of a child, the unwavering love of a mother, and the quiet presence of someone who simply showed up and stayed. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded that healing is possible, that safety is real, and that sometimes family is found, not born. And if this is your first time here, we invite you to join our growing community of listeners who believe in stories that matter. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. From our hearts to yours, thank you for watching. Until next time, take care of each other, and never underestimate the power of being there.